The autumn wind cut through Clara Bennett's threadbare coat as she stood on the platform of Sweetwater Station, Wyoming Territory, 1878. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the reality pressing down on her shoulders like an iron yoke. In her arms, wrapped in her only shawl, lay Jasper, her beloved beagle, whimpering from the infected wound on his hind leg. The veterinarian in Philadelphia had been clear. Without treatment, the dog would die. But veterinarians cost money Clara no longer had. She'd spent her last dollars on the train ticket west, fleeing the debts her late husband had left behind, debts his creditors expected her to pay with her body or her freedom. The nursing certificate in her worn leather bag was supposed to be her salvation, a promise of work in the frontier towns desperate for medical help, but she'd arrived 3 days too early for her position at the Sweetwater Clinic, and her coin purse held nothing but lint and shattered dreams. Before we continue with Clara's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a like. It truly means the world to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments below. Clara's eyes burned as she looked down at Jasper's trusting brown eyes. The dog had been her only companion through her husband's gambling addiction, through his death in a bar fight, through the terrifying nights when creditors pounded on her door. She pulled the thin gold band from her finger, her mother's wedding ring, the last piece of her old life, and approached the station master's window. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I need to see a veterinarian. This ring, it's real gold. It must be worth something." The station master, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, barely glanced at her. "Ain't no veterinarian in Sweetwater, lady. Nearest one's in Cheyenne, 3 days' ride, and that ring wouldn't buy you a horse, let alone passage." Clara's knees weakened. She sank onto a wooden bench, clutching Jasper closer as hot tears finally spilled down her cheeks. This was it, the end of hope. She'd survived so much, fought so hard, only to lose the one soul who'd never abandoned her. "That's a fine-looking beagle you've got there." The voice was deep, textured like aged whiskey, and it came from a man Clara hadn't noticed approaching. She looked up, and her breath caught despite her despair. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the afternoon sun streaming through the station's windows. His hair was dark brown, almost black, with threads of silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of spring grass. Sharp, intelligent, and currently fixed on Jasper with genuine concern. He wore well-made clothes, a black wool coat over a pressed white shirt, but his hands bore the calluses of hard work. Late 30s, Clara estimated, with the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. "I'm sorry," Clara said, wiping her eyes quickly and trying to compose herself. "I didn't mean to—" "That wound needs cleaning and stitching," the man interrupted, crouching down to her level with surprising grace for someone his size. He extended one large hand toward Jasper, letting the dog sniff him before gently examining the injury. "Probably got it on barbed wire or a nail. Infected, but not beyond saving. Not yet." "I know," Clara whispered. "I'm a nurse. I know exactly what it needs. I don't have the supplies or the money to buy them." The man's green eyes shifted from the dog to her face, and Clara felt exposed under that gaze, as if he could see every desperate mile she'd traveled, every degradation she'd endured. "I'm Thomas Mercer," he said simply. "I own the Triple M Ranch, about 8 miles northwest of here, biggest cattle operation in the territory." He paused, then added, "I also have a fully stocked medical barn for my livestock. Antiseptic, sutures, bandages, everything that dog needs." Hope flickered in Clara's chest, dangerous and painful. "I can pay you," she said quickly, holding out the ring with shaking hands. "It's not much, but it's real gold. My mother's ring. It's all I have, but keep your ring." The words were gentle but firm, and Thomas closed her fingers around the small band with his own much larger hand. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through Clara's cold fingers. "Gold isn't what we need here," Thomas continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "You said you're a nurse." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "My ranch is short on hands right now. Spring injuries, a few men moved on. I've got 20 cowboys who think whiskey cures everything from broken bones to snake bites. I could use someone with actual medical knowledge around." He stood, extending his hand to help her up. "You treat my men when they need it, help my housekeeper with meals, and in return, you get room, board, and we save that dog of yours. Fair trade?" Clara stared at his offered hand, her mind racing. Every instinct she'd developed in the past year screamed warnings. Men didn't help women without expecting payment of a different kind. Thomas Mercer was too handsome, too wealthy, too confident. This was a trap, surely. But Jasper whimpered in her arms, and she felt the hot wetness of infection seeping through her shawl. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. I could be anyone." Something flickered in Thomas's expression, old pain quickly masked. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be alone in the world, with nothing but a loyal companion to keep you going." His jaw tightened. "And I know what it's like to lose that companion because you couldn't save them in time." The raw honesty in his voice decided it. Clara took his hand and stood. Jasper cradled carefully against her chest. "Clara Bennett," she said, "and this is Jasper. We accept your offer, Mr. Mercer." "Thomas," he corrected, and for the first time, a hint of a smile touched his stern features. "If we're going to be working together, might as well use first names." He gestured toward a black stallion tied outside the station, a magnificent animal that matched its owner's imposing presence. "Can you ride?" Clara shook her head, embarrassment flushing her cheeks. "Then you'll ride with me. Hold the dog carefully. Ghost doesn't spook easy, but he's protective of his riders." Before Clara could protest, Thomas had lifted her onto the saddle as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. The solid wall of his chest pressed against her back, one muscular arm coming around her waist to hold the reins, careful not to jostle Jasper. "Comfortable?" His breath was warm against her ear, and Clara felt a strange flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. "Yes," she managed, acutely aware of how this was the closest she'd been to a man since her husband's death, and how different it felt. Where Robert had made her feel small and trapped, Thomas's presence felt protective, solid as oak. The ride to the Triple M took nearly an hour, and with every passing mile Clara's anxiety grew. The ranch, when it finally came into view, stole what little breath she had left. The main house was a sprawling structure of timber and stone, 2 stories tall, with a wide porch that wrapped around the entire building. Behind it stretched barn after barn, corrals filled with cattle and horses, and several smaller buildings she assumed were bunkhouses. Everything spoke of prosperity and careful management. This wasn't just a successful ranch, it was an empire. "How many acres?" Clara asked, awed despite herself. 15,000, give or take," Thomas replied casually, as if discussing the weather. "Been in my family 3 generations. My grandfather started it, my father expanded it, and I keep it running." There was something unspoken in that pause, but before Clara could question it, Thomas had dismounted and was lifting her down with the same effortless strength. Her feet touched solid ground, but she swayed slightly, days of poor food and little sleep catching up with her. Thomas's hands steadied her immediately, and when she looked up she found him closer than propriety allowed, his green eyes dark with concern. "When did you last eat?" The question was direct, almost harsh. Yesterday morning, I think." His jaw clenched. "Mary!" He called toward the house, not taking his eyes off Clara. "Mary, we need food, and bring the medical kit from the barn to the kitchen." An older woman appeared on the porch, short, stout, with grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that could probably spot a lie at 50 paces. She took in the scene with one sweeping glance, and her stern expression softened. "Land's sake, Thomas, what have you brought home now?" But her tone was fond, not critical, and she was already hustling down the steps. "Poor thing looks half-starved. And that dog, oh, you poor baby." "This is Clara Bennett," Thomas said. "She's a nurse. She'll be staying with us, helping with the men when they get themselves injured. Clara, this is Mary Rodriguez, my housekeeper. She basically runs this place while I pretend to be in charge." Mary snorted, but was already ushering Clara toward the house. "Get that dog to the kitchen table. Thomas, you get the medical supplies, and for heaven's sake, give the woman some space to breathe. You're looming like a thundercloud." Thomas stepped back immediately, a faint color touching his weathered cheeks. Clara found herself almost missing the warmth of his presence. The kitchen was spacious and spotlessly clean, with a large wooden table at its center and a cast-iron stove radiating blessed heat. Mary gently took Jasper from Clara's arms, laying him on a clean towel on the table, while Thomas appeared with a wooden box filled with medical supplies that would have made any frontier doctor jealous. "I can do this," Clara said, her professional instincts overriding her exhaustion. "But I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and someone to hold him steady. He's going to fight when I clean the wound." "I'll hold him," Thomas said immediately, positioning himself at the table. His large hands were surprisingly gentle as they stroked Jasper's head. "Easy, boy. We're going to help you." For the next hour, Clara worked with focused intensity, cleaning the infected wound, debriding dead tissue, and carefully stitching the torn skin. True to her fear, Jasper struggled and whimpered, but Thomas held him with firm gentleness, murmuring soothing words in a voice so tender it made Clara's throat tight. This man, this wealthy, powerful rancher, cared about a stranger's dog with genuine compassion. She'd been married for 5 years and never once seen her husband show such empathy. "You're good at this," Thomas observed as Clara tied off the final suture. "Real steady hands. Where'd you train?" Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia," Clara replied, applying a clean bandage. 3 years of training. I specialized in surgical nursing." She managed a weak smile. "Not that it matters much out here. Most frontier towns are just grateful if you can set a bone and stop bleeding." "It matters," Thomas said firmly. "Good medicine is good medicine, whether it's in Philadelphia or Wyoming Territory." Mary had been bustling around the kitchen during the procedure, and now she set down a plate in front of Clara that made her stomach clench with hunger. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and green beans glistening with butter. "Eat," Mary commanded. "You're thin as a rail. And don't even think about arguing, Thomas. Make her eat." "I don't think I could stop her if I tried," Thomas said, a real smile finally breaking through his serious expression. "Clara strikes me as the stubborn type." "I'm sitting right here," Clara protested, but she was already reaching for the fork, her body overriding her embarrassment. The first bite of chicken nearly made her weep with relief. Thomas and Mary exchanged a look Clara couldn't quite interpret, but she was too focused on eating to care. Jasper, sedated by the laudanum she'd given him, slept peacefully on his towel, his breathing steady and strong. "I'll show you to your room after you eat," Mary said, her voice gentler now. "It's upstairs, at the end of the hall. Private, with its own wash basin. You'll be comfortable there." "Thank you," Clara whispered, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of her fortunes. This morning she'd been destitute and desperate. Now she had shelter, food, and hope. "Thank you both. I don't know how to—" "You don't need to thank us," Thomas interrupted. "You're working for your keep, same as everyone else here. We help each other at the Triple M. That's how it works." But his eyes, meeting hers across the table, said something different, something that made Clara's pulse quicken in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, with Jasper snoring softly on a cushion beside her, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what had happened. Thomas Mercer was an enigma, wealthy but unpretentious, powerful but gentle, guarded but kind. And the way he'd looked at her in the kitchen when Mary wasn't watching. No. Clara firmly pushed those thoughts away. She'd learned the hard way what happened when women mistook kindness for attraction, when they confused gratitude for something deeper. Thomas had given her a job, nothing more. She would do her work, save her money, and eventually move to town when her position at the clinic started. She absolutely would not develop feelings for her employer. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally arrived, her dreams were filled with green eyes and gentle hands. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of roosters and distant cattle. Jasper was already awake, tail wagging tentatively, testing his bandaged leg. "Careful, boy," Clara murmured, kneeling to examine the wound. No fresh bleeding, no increased swelling. The antibiotics and sutures were doing their job. Relief flooded through her. A soft knock at the door made her start. "Miss Bennet, it's Mary. I've brought you some clothes." Clara opened the door to find the housekeeper holding a bundle of fabric. These were... well, they were Thomas's late wife's things. He said you might need something more practical than that dress you came in. Late wife. The words hung in the air, explaining so much, the sadness in Thomas's eyes, his comment about knowing what it was like to lose a companion. "I couldn't possibly," Clara began, but Mary was already pressing the clothes into her hands. "Thomas insists. Catherine would have wanted her things used, not mouldering in a trunk. Besides, you can't nurse cowboys in a city dress." Mary's eyes softened. "She died 3 years ago. Cholera outbreak. Thomas watched helpless while she suffered. It's why he's so particular about having medical help around now." Clara's heart ached for the pain behind that simple explanation. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll take good care of them." The clothes fit reasonably well. A simple cotton dress in dark blue, a warm shawl, and sturdy boots that were only slightly too large. When Clara came downstairs, Mary nodded approvingly. "Now you look like a ranch woman. There's breakfast in the kitchen. Then Thomas wants to show you the medical barn and introduce you to the men." Thomas was waiting by the back door, dressed in worn denim and a leather vest, his dark hair still damp from washing. He looked different in working clothes, less like a wealthy rancher and more like the rugged cowboys Clara had imagined populating the West. "How's Jasper?" he asked immediately. "Improving. The infection is responding to treatment." Clara smiled. "You saved his life yesterday." "We saved his life," Thomas corrected. "I just provided the supplies. You did the hard part." He gestured toward the door. "Ready for the grand tour?" The Triple M in morning light was even more impressive than in twilight. Cowboys moved with practiced efficiency through their morning routines, feeding horses, mucking stalls, checking cattle. They nodded respectfully to Thomas, but Clara noticed how their eyes tracked her with curiosity. The medical barn was a revelation. A dedicated building with clean examination tables, organized supplies, and even a separate room for isolation cases. Thomas had clearly spared no expense. "I know it seems excessive," Thomas said, misinterpreting her stunned silence, "but I've got 60 men working this ranch during peak season. Injuries happen. Broken bones, cuts, burns, the occasional bullet wound from rustlers or accidents. I got tired of watching good men suffer or die from infections that could have been prevented." "It's not excessive," Clara breathed. "It's incredible. Most city hospitals aren't this well equipped." Pride flickered in Thomas's eyes. "I may have gone a bit overboard. Catherine used to say I couldn't do anything halfway." His expression clouded for a moment, then cleared. "Come on, time to meet your patients." The bunkhouse was a long building divided into sections, and when Thomas opened the door, conversation died. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on Clara, with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. "Listen up." Thomas's voice carried authority without needing to shout. "This is Miss Clara Bennett. She's a trained nurse from Pennsylvania Hospital, and she'll be handling any medical issues from now on. That means if you're hurt, sick, or stupid enough to get yourself injured, you go to her, not to each other. Understood?" A chorus of "Yes, boss" rippled through the room. "Any of you give her trouble, disrespect her, or make her uncomfortable in any way, you'll answer to me. She's under my protection, same as everyone else on this ranch." Thomas's eyes were hard as flint. "We clear?" "Yes, boss." An older cowboy with a weathered face and kind eyes stepped forward. "Name's Pete Santos, ma'am. Been with the Triple M for 15 years. Welcome aboard." He shot the younger men a warning look. "Anyone who doesn't treat Miss Bennett with respect will also answer to me. Boss ain't the only one who can make life difficult." Laughter broke the tension, and suddenly men were introducing themselves, shaking her hand carefully. A few even removing their hats in a gesture of respect that made Clara's eyes sting. These were good men, hard men, certainly, shaped by harsh land and harder work, but good men nonetheless. "Thank you," Clara said when the introductions finished. "I look forward to working with all of you. And please, if you're injured, don't wait until it's serious. Come see me early. Prevention is easier than cure." As they walked back to the main house, Thomas asked, "Think you can handle them?" "I've handled rooms full of injured soldiers and drunk factory workers," Clara replied. "Cowboys might actually be an improvement." Thomas laughed, a real, full laugh that transformed his stern features. "You might be right about that." The sound of his laughter stayed with Clara throughout the day as she organized the medical barn, inventoried supplies, and treated her first patient, a young cowboy named Jimmy who'd sliced his hand on a broken bridle buckle. The cut was clean, easily stitched, and Jimmy left with strict instructions about keeping it dry and changing the bandage. She fell into a routine over the next week that was both exhausting and satisfying. Mornings were for rounds, checking on anyone injured or ill. Afternoons, she helped Mary with cooking and preserving food for the winter ahead. Evenings, after dinner was served and cleaned up, she would sit on the porch with Jasper, who was healing beautifully, and watch the sun set over the endless Wyoming plains. Thomas usually found her there. It started innocently enough, him asking about her day, her asking about the ranch. But gradually, as autumn deepened and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter, their conversations grew longer and more personal. "Why did you become a nurse?" Thomas asked one evening, sitting beside her on the porch steps, his shoulder almost touching hers. Clara hesitated, unused to anyone asking about her dreams rather than her duties. "My mother died when I was 12, she finally said. "Childbed fever, after delivering my baby brother. He died too. I watched it happen, watched her suffer, and I couldn't do anything." She swallowed hard. "I swore I'd learn how to help people like her, so they wouldn't have to die alone and afraid." Thomas's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers gentle as they intertwined with her smaller ones. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "That's a hard thing for a child to witness." "What about you?" Clara asked, emboldened by his touch. "Why ranching? You're clearly educated. You could have done anything." "This land is in my blood," Thomas replied, his voice deep and contemplative. "My grandfather fought for every acre, defended it against claim jumpers and harsh winters that killed half his cattle. My father expanded it, made it prosperous. And Catherine..." He paused, and Clara felt his grip tighten slightly on her hand. Catherine loved this place. She made it a home, not just a business. After she died, I thought about selling, moving back east, but I couldn't. She's here, in every sunrise, every blade of grass. Leaving would feel like abandoning her. She was lucky to have someone who loved her so much, Clara whispered. I was the lucky one, Thomas said. He turned to look at Clara then, his face illuminated by the lamplight spilling from the kitchen window. But Clara, the thing about grief is that it can trap you, keep you looking backward instead of forward. Catherine wouldn't have wanted that for me. The weight of his gaze made Clara's breath catch. This was dangerous territory, the kind that led to heartbreak and complications. She should pull her hand away, make an excuse, retreat to her safe room. Instead, she squeezed his fingers gently. Then maybe it's time to start looking forward. Thomas's eyes darkened with something that made Clara's heart race. He leaned closer, close enough that she could see the individual whiskers on his jaw, smell the leather and sage scent of him. Clara, he murmured, and his voice was rough with an emotion she was afraid to name. I should tell you, boss! The shout shattered the moment like glass. Pete Santos was running toward the house, his face grim in the lamplight. We got trouble, big trouble. Thomas was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the revolver he always wore. What kind of trouble? Fletcher and his men. They're at the north fence line, cutting wire and driving off cattle. 30 head at least, maybe more. Damn it! Thomas turned to Clara, his expression hardening into something cold and dangerous. Go inside, lock the doors, don't open them for anyone but me or Mary. Fear clutched at Clara's chest. Thomas, what? James Fletcher owns the ranch next to mine, Thomas said quickly, already moving toward the barn where his horse waited. He's been trying to buy my land for years. When I refused, he started getting aggressive, cutting fences, stealing cattle, running off my hands. His jaw clenched. I've tried settling this peacefully, but Fletcher doesn't understand peace. You can't go alone. I'm not. Pete, round up 10 men, armed. We're riding out now. Thomas looked back at Clara, and his expression softened for just a moment. I'll be back, Clara, I promise. Then he was gone, riding into the darkness with his men, leaving Clara standing on the porch with her heart in her throat and 1,000 terrible scenarios playing through her mind. Mary appeared at her elbow. Come inside, child. No use watching and worrying. But Clara did worry, pacing the kitchen floor while Mary calmly worked on mending. Jasper whined at the door, sensing his mistress's distress. Hours crawled past. Midnight came and went. Clara had treated bullet wounds, knew exactly what a gunshot could do to a human body. The images plagued her, each one featuring Thomas's blood-soaked body. It was nearly 3 a.m. when she heard horses. Clara ran to the window, her heart pounding, and relief nearly buckled her knees when she saw Thomas dismount, whole and upright. She yanked open the door before Mary could stop her and flew down the steps. Are you hurt? Any of the men I should... We're fine, Thomas said, catching her shoulders gently. No shots fired. Fletcher wasn't expecting us to respond so fast. When he saw we were armed and ready, he backed down. His eyes searched her face. You were worried. Of course I was worried. The words burst out before Clara could censor them. You rode off into the dark to confront armed men, and I'm supposed to what? Sit calmly and embroider. Something fierce and possessive flared in Thomas's eyes. You care, he said softly as if testing the words, about what happens to me. Clara faltered, suddenly aware they were standing very close. That his hands were still on her shoulders, that the entire ranch could probably hear this conversation. You've been kind to me. Of course I care. Kindness, Thomas repeated, and a wry smile touched his mouth. Is that all it is, Clara? Her breath caught. This was the moment, the crossroads. She could deflect, retreat behind propriety and gratitude, or she could be honest. No, she whispered, it's not all it is. Thomas made a low sound in his throat, something between relief and desperation, and then his hands were sliding from her shoulders to frame her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with aching gentleness. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said, his voice rough. "If you don't want that, tell me to stop." Clara's answer was to rise on her toes and close the distance between them. The kiss was nothing like the perfunctory pecks her husband had given her. Thomas kissed her like she was precious, like she was air and water and everything necessary for survival. His mouth moved over hers with passionate reverence, and when Clara gasped at the sensation, he deepened the kiss, one hand sliding into her hair while the other pulled her closer. Clara's fingers clutched at his shirt, her entire body lighting up with feelings she'd never experienced in 5 years of marriage. This was what the novels talked about, what the other nurses had whispered about. This consuming fire that made everything else fade to insignificance. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan this," he said raggedly. "Didn't plan to feel this way about you. But Clara, I can't. I can't pretend anymore. These past weeks, watching you work, listening to you laugh, seeing how gentle you are with Jasper and my men," he pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "You're not just working for me. You're not just another hand on the ranch. You're becoming everything." Clara's eyes filled with tears, happy ones, terrified ones. "Thomas, I'm broken. My husband was a fool who didn't deserve you," Thomas interrupted firmly. "Whatever he did, whatever he said, it doesn't define you. I see you, Clara. I see a woman worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the word. "Worth loving." "You can't love me," Clara protested weakly, even as her heart soared. "You barely know me. I know you saved Jasper's life with steady hands and exhausted eyes. I know you treat scraped-up cowboys with the same respect you'd give a senator. I know you make Mary laugh in the kitchen, and you sneak extra food to the barn cats, and you watch the sunset like it's a miracle." Thomas cupped her face again, his green eyes blazing with sincerity. "I know you're brave enough to leave everything behind and start over. I know you're kind, but not weak, gentle, but not soft. I know enough, Clara. I know enough to know I want more." Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She'd spent so long believing she wasn't worth loving, that her value lay only in what she could do, not who she was. And here was this impossibly good man telling her she mattered. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a small voice, "I'm afraid of trusting again, of opening my heart and having it destroyed." "Then we'll go slow," Thomas promised, "as slow as you need. I'm not going anywhere, Clara. The Triple M is your home now for as long as you want it to be." He smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "We'll figure this out together." Together. The word wrapped around Clara's heart like a warm blanket. "Together," she echoed and kissed him again. From the kitchen window, Mary Rodriguez smiled and returned to her mending. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. True to his word, Thomas courted her with patient determination. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows, purple lupine and yellow arrow-leaf balsam root. He taught her to ride, his patient instructions turning her from terrified beginner to competent horsewoman. He showed her the far corners of the ranch, the hidden valleys where elk grazed and eagles nested. And every evening, after dinner was cleared and the ranch settled for the night, they sat together on the porch steps and talked about everything. Her childhood in Philadelphia, his memories of building the ranch with his father, her dreams of opening a clinic, his hopes for expanding the herd. They kissed, sweet stolen moments that made Clara's toes curl and her heart race. But Thomas never pushed for more, never made her feel pressured or obligated. He was content to hold her hand, to rest his head on hers, while they watched stars appear, to simply be together. The ranch hands noticed, of course, but instead of crude jokes, they offered genuine smiles. Pete Santos even cornered Clara one morning in the medical barn. "Boss is different since you came," the old cowboy said. "Lighter, happier. I haven't seen him smile like that since. Well, since before Miss Catherine passed." He fixed Clara with a serious look. "You're good for him, Miss Clara, and he's good for you. Don't let fear keep you from something real." Clara took those words to heart. Winter arrived in earnest, bringing snow that blanketed the ranch in pristine white. The work changed. Less fence mending and more animal care, ensuring the cattle had enough food, that pipes didn't freeze, that buildings stayed warm. Clara was busier than ever, treating everything from frostbite to a nasty case of influenza that swept through the bunkhouse. Thomas worked alongside his men, never asking them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Clara would watch him from the medical barn window, marveling at his strength as he lifted hay bales, his competence as he delivered a breech calf, his gentleness as he calmed a spooked horse. He was extraordinary, and somehow, impossibly, he chose her. It was a bitter February morning when everything changed. Clara was in the medical barn, organizing supplies, when she heard horses approaching fast. Always a bad sign. She grabbed her emergency bag and ran outside to find Thomas dismounting in a controlled fall, his face pale, his left arm cradled against his chest. "What happened?" Clara was already at his side, professional instincts overriding panic. "Bull caught me off guard," Thomas gritted out. "Tossed me into the fence. Arm might be broken." "Might be?" Clara gently probed the arm, feeling Thomas flinch despite his attempt at stoicism. The bone wasn't protruding, but there was definitely a fracture. "Inside, now." "Pete, I need hot water and clean linens." "D." Getting Thomas onto the examination table was an exercise in stubbornness meeting immovable will. He kept insisting he was fine. He'd had worse. It was just a bruise. Clara ignored him completely. "Shirt off," she ordered, and when he hesitated, she added tartly, "I'm a nurse, Thomas. I've seen male anatomy before. Your modesty is noted and dismissed." Despite his pain, Thomas laughed. "Yes, a mom." With Pete's help, they carefully removed Thomas's shirt, revealing the muscular torso Clara had only felt through clothing. But professional concern overrode any appreciation. A massive bruise was already forming across his ribs, and the arm was definitely broken. "This is going to hurt," Clara warned, meeting his eyes. "I need to set the bone." "I trust you," Thomas said simply. Those 3 words nearly undid her. Clara took a steadying breath and began to work. Setting the bone required precise manipulation, and even with laudanum to dull the pain, Thomas went white and rigid beneath her hands. Sweat beaded his forehead, and his free hand gripped the table edge hard enough to leave dents in the wood. "I'm sorry," Clara murmured, working as quickly as she could. "I'm so sorry, I know it hurts. You're saving me," Thomas gasped out. Don't apologize for that." Finally, blessedly, the bone aligned. Clara splinted it carefully, wrapping the arm in plaster-soaked bandages that would harden into a protective cast. The entire process took an hour, and by the end, Thomas was shaking with exhaustion and suppressed pain. 6 weeks minimum, Clara said firmly. "No heavy lifting, no ranch work, no arguing. You have a fractured ulna and possibly cracked ribs. You're going to rest and heal, or I swear I'll tie you to that bed myself." Threatening to tie me up? Despite his condition, Thomas managed a weak grin. "Careful, Clara. A man could get ideas." "Thomas Mercer, you are injured and drugged, and I am not engaging with that comment." But Clara couldn't quite suppress her smile as she helped him sit up. "Pete, help me get him to the house. He's staying in bed for at least 3 days." "I can't stay in bed," Thomas protested as they maneuvered him toward the door. "The ranch will run fine without you," Clara interrupted. "Pete's been your foreman for 15 years. He knows what to do. Your job is to heal. For the next 3 days, Clara barely left Thomas's side. Mary brought food and supplies, but Clara was the one who administered pain medication, changed bandages, checked for infection, and, most importantly, kept her patient from trying to work. It was harder than treating any injury. "I need to check the south fence," Thomas argued on day 2. Trying to get out of bed, Clara physically pushed him back down. "You need to stay horizontal. The south fence will survive without you." The feed inventory, Pete's handling it. No. Clara crossed her arms. "Thomas, if you don't rest, that bone won't heal properly. You could end up with permanent damage. Is the ranch worth losing the use of your arm?" That finally penetrated his stubborn skull. Thomas sagged back against the pillows, looking frustrated and vulnerable in a way Clara had never seen. "I don't know how to do nothing," he admitted quietly. "This ranch is everything. If I'm not working, not providing, not leading, what's the point of me?" Clara's heart cracked open. She sat on the edge of the bed, taking his good hand in both of hers. "You're not valuable because of what you do, Thomas. You're valuable because of who you are." She squeezed his fingers gently. "You're a good man. A kind man. A man who stops to help strangers and their dogs at train stations. That's worth more than all the cattle and acres in Wyoming territory." Thomas stared at her, his green eyes suspiciously bright. "How do you do that?" he whispered. "How do you see the best in everyone?" "I learned from you," Clara replied simply. "You saw something worth saving in me when I couldn't see it myself. You gave me hope when I had none. You made me believe I could be more than just damaged goods." "You were never damaged." Thomas's voice was fierce despite his weakened state. "You were wounded. There's a difference. Wounds can heal." Clara leaned down and kissed him softly. "Then heal, Thomas, for both of us." He did heal, though he complained constantly about the enforced rest. But Clara noticed he also seemed to relax in ways she'd never seen before, laughing more easily, sleeping more soundly, actually sitting still long enough to read the books she brought him. One evening, about 2 weeks into his recovery, Clara was checking his arm when Thomas caught her wrist gently with his good hand. "Marry me," he said. Clara's hands stilled. "What?" "Marry me," Thomas repeated, his eyes locked on hers with unwavering intensity. "I know it's fast. I know you might not be ready, but Clara, I'm 36 years old, and I've loved exactly 2 women in my life. Catherine taught me what it meant to build a partnership, to share a life, and now you—" He struggled for words. "You've taught me that hearts can heal, that it's possible to love again without betraying what came before. I don't want to waste time being cautious or proper. I want you as my wife, my partner, my everything. Will you marry me?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas, I'm nobody. I came here with nothing but a sick dog and a bag of shame. You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone," Thomas interrupted, pulling her down to sit beside him. "I want you. The woman who fights bulls with bandages and refuses to let me be stupid about my health. The woman who makes my men feel valued and treats barn cats like royalty. The woman who looks at Wyoming sunsets like they're painted just for her." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You're not nobody, Clara. You're the person who makes me want to be better. You're the person who turned a house back into a home. You're the person I want to wake up beside for the rest of my life." "Yes," Clara breathed, unable to hold back the word any longer. "Yes, I'll marry you." Thomas's smile could have lit the entire ranch. He pulled her into a careful kiss, mindful of his healing ribs, but filled with such joy that Clara felt it down to her toes. "I don't have a ring yet," Thomas said when they finally pulled apart. "I'll get you the biggest diamond in Cheyenne." "I don't need a diamond," Clara interrupted. She pulled her mother's thin gold band from her pocket, where she'd carried it every day since arriving at the Triple M. This ring represents survival. It represents starting over. And now. She slipped it onto her own finger with Thomas's help. Now it represents new beginnings. Thomas looked at her like she'd given him the world. I love you, Clara Bennett, more than I ever thought I could love anyone again. I love you too, Clara whispered, even when you're a terrible patient. They were married 6 weeks later, on the first warm day of spring. The ceremony took place on the Triple M's front porch, with a traveling preacher, the entire ranch staff, and half of Sweetwater in attendance. Clara wore a simple white dress that Mary had altered from Catherine's wedding gown, with Thomas's blessing and even help, removing the lace that had belonged to his first wife and adding new embroidery that represented Clara's story. Pete Santos walked her down the makeshift aisle, and Jasper, fully heeled and sporting a ridiculous bow tie, served as ring-bearer, carrying the bands in a pouch tied to his collar. But the moment Clara would remember for the rest of her life was when Thomas took her hands and spoke his vows. I promise to be your partner in all things, he said, his deep voice carrying across the assembled crowd, to respect your strength and support your dreams, to go slow when you need gentle and stand firm when you need steady, to protect what we build together, not just this ranch but this life, this love. He smiled, and Clara's heart overflowed. You're not property. You're not a convenient solution. You're a person worth celebrating, and I swear I'll spend every day proving that to you. Clara's vows were simpler, but no less heartfelt. I promise to be your healer in all the ways that matter. To tend not just your wounds, but your heart. To build a life with you that honors both our pasts and our future. She squeezed his hands. Together, Thomas. Always together. Together, he echoed, and kissed her to thunderous applause. The reception lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Clara danced with Thomas, with Pete, with every cowboy on the ranch who politely asked. But her eyes always found her husband, the man who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up rather than take advantage. Late in the evening, Thomas pulled her away from the celebration, leading her to their favorite spot on the porch steps. The moon was full, painting the ranch in silver light, and in the distance, cattle lowed contentedly. Happy? Thomas asked, his arm secure around her waist. Deliriously, Clara replied, leaning into his warmth, though I still can't quite believe this is real. 6 months ago, I was offering my mother's ring for dog medicine. Now I'm married to the most remarkable man in Wyoming Territory. 7 months ago, I was going through the motions of living. Thomas countered, existing but not alive. Then a stubborn nurse with a sick beagle showed me what I'd been missing. He kissed her temple gently. You saved more than Jasper that day at the train station, Clara. You saved me too. We saved each other, Clara corrected, and kissed him properly, not caring that half the ranch could probably see them. That's how this works. Partners, remember. Partners, Thomas agreed. In everything. 3 years later, Clara stood in the medical barn, now expanded into a full clinic serving the entire county, and watched her husband teach their 2-year-old daughter how to pet a horse. Little Catherine, named for the woman whose kindness had helped bring them together, squealed with delight as the gentle mare nuzzled her tiny hand. Jasper, greyer now but still spry, dozed in his favorite sunny spot, and Clara's hand rested on her slightly swollen belly where their second child grew. The Triple M had become everything Thomas promised. A home, a sanctuary, a place where healing happened in all its forms. Clara ran the clinic 3 days a week, treating everyone from ranchers to miners to families traveling west. The rest of the time she spent with Thomas and Catherine, building the life they'd promised each other. It hadn't all been easy. There had been hard winters and failed crops, conflicts with neighboring ranches and the occasional injury that scared them both. But through it all, they'd kept their promise. Together. Clara thought back to that desperate woman at the train station, so broken she'd been ready to trade her last possession for hope. If she could go back and tell that version of herself what was coming, the love, the family, the purpose, she would. But maybe the journey was necessary. Maybe you had to walk through darkness to truly appreciate the light. "Clara!" Thomas called, waving her over. "Catherine wants to show you her new trick." Clara walked toward her family, her heart full to bursting. The rich farmer who'd helped a desperate nurse and her dog at a train station had become so much more than a rescuer. He'd become her partner, her equal, her love. Their story, born from desperation and kindness at a small Wyoming train station, had indeed made history. Not in newspapers or record books, but in the quiet, profound way that all great love stories do, by transforming two broken people into something whole. Together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Clara and Thomas's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.